Good afternoon again, and welcome to our Fraternity and Sorority Life webinar about the recruitment and intake processes here at Duke. My name is Grace Sullivan, and I work in the Dean of Students office and with parent and family programs here at Duke. And I'd like to welcome you all. We're here today with Emily Dye, the Director of Student Engagement, and the team from Fraternity and Sorority Life, Anna and Kyle. We'll let them introduce themselves in a minute, but I'm just going to start with an overview of what you all can expect today. So we will hand over the presentation to Fraternity and Sorority Life so they can give you an overview of what to expect during recruitment and intake and other things about fraternity and sorority life here. And then as they're speaking, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I will send out a chat to you all so you know where you can submit those questions. But if you submit them as we're presenting, then after the presentation, I will field out those questions and facilitate a more interactive question and answer period. So with that, I think that I'm going to hand it over.
Thank you all so much for being here, and thanks again to Grace and the rest of the Dean of Students team for having us. My name is Emily Dye, and I'm the Director of Student Engagement here at Duke. In that role, I oversee both our fraternity and sorority team and also our Center for Leadership Development and Social Action. Also with us today, there are faces since you can't see us. But so again, I'm Emily. Also with us today is our Associate Director, Anna, and our Student Development Coordinator, Kyle. And so the three of us will spend a little bit of time with you today talking a little bit about fraternity and sorority life at Duke. So we always like to start our conversations about our community with our mission statement, which you all can read on the screen. And there are a couple things that we like to highlight when we're speaking about the mission of fraternity and sorority life at Duke. And those things are bolded as being sort of the primary pillars that we align our work with here and hope that our students see through all the programming and opportunities that they have through their community and through their Duke experience. So leadership and civic responsibility. We hope that they're developing an appreciation for diversity. Also a lot about wellness, not just wellness when thinking about like healthy eating or sleeping, but also just that it's enhancing their academic wellness, their personal wellness, and the many dimensions that our Do Well team talks about. And then also that we're facilitating opportunities for critical thinking. It is easy to just get involved in a lot of things at Duke and not take time to make meaning of how those things relate to your classroom experiences or to what you want to do beyond your time at Duke. And we hope that the opportunities that we're providing for students are intentional in that they're gaining skills that are going to help them be successful in the classroom, in the other things that they're involved in here, and then of course beyond graduation.
And in thinking about the mission that we have and the different pillars and expectations and standards that we host within our office and the programming that we have a group of 4 different governing councils that look over different types of organizations and chapters within our fraternity sorority realm. And so looking at that, as you can see on the screen here, we have 4 different breakdowns of what that looks like. First listed is the National Pan-Hellenic Council. So this is a group of historically 9 African-American fraternities and sororities that established in the early 1900s. Though they have a lot of basis in service and academics, but they also have a very key component on being able to advocate for the Black and African-American voice, going all the way back to early 1900s. Secondly listed on this page is the Interfraternity Council. That has been, is what you see as more of the standard fraternity, social fraternity, focusing on leadership, service, and action. And then coupled with that, kind of skipping one down to the Pan-Hellenic Association is kind of the counterpart to that, specifically for the women. We have 10 sororities here on this campus that make up that association. And so part of that, a lot of what they focus on is also the service piece, the academics, and then being able to build strong leadership within women. And then lastly, rounding out the 4, we also have something called the Multicultural Greek Council. Much like the National Pan-Hellenic Council, though they have a specific focus on service and development and leadership, but they also have a key component of different cultural backings, whether it be Latino or Asian or Pacific Islander identifying, and then also a Native American, and then also just understanding culture and heritage and how do we support and develop those voices, and they specifically cite that in their missions. And so in thinking about these kind of organizations and why they're broken up in different ways, ultimately we recognize that there are 6 main benefits of membership. So it's specifically thinking about the opportunity to come together as a collective, but being able to build something called brotherhood and sisterhood. So defining that family here on this campus, be able to find an opportunity to have mentorship within there, being able to find a family and support structure during any time of your experience here at Duke University and ultimately beyond. But also beyond that, looking at just your experience at Duke, but being able to connect with different Duke staff, finding different opportunities to engage with alumni well beyond just the confines of your physical time at Duke, but extending that well past the 4 years. Looking at leadership development and thinking about how am I able to be a constructive leader throughout the experience here, and how do I prolong that into the communities around the campus, but also once I move into my family, whether it's in the religious situation, or even if you're looking at your career, how am I being a leader in every aspect of my life? This is a really key opportunity to be able to expand upon that. Looking into more civic engagement is something that our organizations really take a lot of pride in, whether it be locally or nationally. The amount of opportunity, the amount of dollars, the amount of hours put into service and philanthropy is something that really take a lot of pride in celebrating and trying to promote more engagement within the communities around us. Organizations themselves are also very social in being able to find social excellence, social responsibility, but also being able to have an opportunity to really just come together, have a good time, be able to be productive citizens, but also have a lot of meaningful interactions with each other as brothers and sisters, as communities, and be able to just have a really productive, positive, exciting time here at Duke and beyond. Then lastly, being students for the first part of their identity, they have a strong emphasis on the academic experience they have here and be able to support each other very heavily in their academic endeavors so they're able to eventually graduate, get out of here, and then be able to be really productive in the world. Looking at the population at Duke specifically, roughly 40% of undergraduate women are affiliated in one of our sororities on campus. About 33% of the undergraduate population for men, and then ultimately over a third of our undergraduate population is in one of our organizations. Within our office specifically, looking at the mission and what we want to be able to provide for students, is we've taken a number of key initiatives to be able to ensure that the experience that they're having in our organizations are very productive and meaningful to their time at Duke. Specifically, we have a number of programs to be able to define the life cycle of membership and be able to support that from their first semester of joining into ensuring that they're transitioning beyond graduation and still being a productive member within their organization. So looking at Leadership Academy, we're able to bring a lot of the opportunities to take a leadership role in their chapters and expand upon that and support those around them. We have organizational management training to be able to ensure that the effectiveness and the efficiency of the operations of each organization, which ultimately can be run as a pseudo business, is done at premium levels. We have a number of programs defined for different levels of years within the time at Duke. So thinking about something we called Embark. So prior to joining, students should have been through a program that were able to outline what values are and joining a values-based organization. Looking at Compass, what we call our sophomore year experience program. So once they've joined the organization, now how do they create their experience? We're able to help them define that so that they can be productive members while having a very positive experience moving forward. What we also host within our office is something called Duke Community Standards. So that's a base level expectation that we hold chapters to maintain to be in good standing within our office. And it goes along specifically with the mission. We have different pinpoints of understanding, whether it be academics, whether it be engagement, education, making sure that the chapters are facilitating a positive and fruitful experience for their members. And then lastly, what we also offer is officer-specific workshops. So if you're looking at different programming aspects or making sure that the finances are straight, there's all the different nuances of the organizations. We're providing key experience to be able to develop that. And that goes into the advising that we have in working with the councils, working with the chapters, working with the chapter leadership to ensure that they're able to take this experience in a productive way and a professional way to be able to talk about that moving forward. How are they getting this experience to put on moving forward within transitional experiences?
So when thinking about joining one of our fraternities or sororities, one of the things that we have accessible on our website to support responsible joining for both potential members and their families is what we call our chapter scorecard. This scorecard outlines a variety of things that we publicly display that hold chapters accountable to the standards that Kyle was talking about before in relation to our Duke Greek community standards. So what you would see on that spreadsheet, which does not translate well onto a PowerPoint slide, which is why you don't actually see it on here, but the link there, if you want to even pull it up on your own computer while we're discussing it, lists all of our organizations that are active here at Duke. It then outlines current membership size of those organizations. It also displays whether or not those chapters were above or below their council average GPAs for the prior semester. It also indicates if any of those, which chapters were held responsible for any sort of student conduct violation in the past semester. And then starting in the version that will launch in the spring, it will indicate whether or not they're in good standing with Fraternity and Sorority Life. When Kyle was discussing our Duke Greek Community Standards program, that program was revamped over this past year, and we're in the process right now of reviewing those documents for this particular year. So when we release the version before classes start in January for this fall semester, we'll indicate which chapters are in good standing and which ones may be on a level of probation. So again, this is publicly available on our website, and we really encourage you as families of students who may be interested in joining fraternities and sororities, but also for your student to take some time to look at that list and see where some of the organizations that they may be interested in fall. If you're a student and you, we assume both care deeply about your students' academic performance here at Duke. And so being able to see the new member average GPA of the last new member class that chapter had. Was it above or below the average for the chapters in their particular council? Can be just a helpful conversation to have. And then, of course, also having that access to some of the student conduct violations that those chapters have been held accountable for, and keeping that in mind when joining organizations, what type of environment that may be for a student. So again, that's publicly available on our website through that link that's on the screen currently, and would encourage you all to look at that information, and for your students too as well. We wanted to talk about a couple of the other elements that people usually have questions about in regard to both the recruitment and intake processes, but also just the new member experience and then also membership. The first of those being alcohol. Alcohol should not be present in any new member education or recruitment intake event. Generally, people who are joining fraternities and sororities are not of legal drinking age. And so they're expected to follow all state, local, and federal laws. On-campus events are expected to follow also our Duke Greek community or our Duke community standards, which are executed through our Office of Student Conduct. So that includes policies through Housing and Residence Life if the event is taking place in a residential life space. We also have policies that all of our registered student organizations must follow in regards to on-campus events with alcohol that include a certain number of trained party monitors present at any event with alcohol that students are hosting. Those students have been trained through our Do Well unit, our wellness unit, on how to sort of help manage large events with alcohol. And then also, obviously, there are national or international policies. Most of those insist that events are BYOB or take place at a third-party vendor, so like at a place with a liquor license, if it involves alcohol. And so all on-campus events are expected to follow all of those policies. Off-campus, they're still expected to follow those international or national policies, which again would typically be a BYOB procedure where you can only bring a certain number of beers, or it may be at a third-party location. We also have the expectation through our Duke Greek Community Standards program that every chapter has a risk management plan on file with Do Well. So those are plans that the chapters have created specifically over the past year to discuss the exact type of events that they are doing and hosting throughout the year to have some conversation about like what are some of the risks that may be involved in those particular events. How can we make sure that we're lowering the probability and impact of things going wrong at those particular events? And then if something does go wrong, those are the plans that we're pulling back out with the chapter to have a conversation, an educational opportunity of what were our blind spots? Did we forget to include something here that we may want to include in the future? Did we not follow our procedures or policies that we had in place, and use it as an opportunity to learn and also to hold the group accountable for what they may not have done in the past situation that they can do in the future? We say all this also knowing that while our students are not 21, some of them will choose to drink. And we know that that's going to be the case for a number of students on our college campus. What we do is try to put as many things in place as possible to support students in if they choose to violate the law and drink underage, that they're doing so as responsibly as they can. And so there's a lot of conversation in our Greek community specifically around having sort of instituting that party monitor system even for off-campus events, and having students trained for those events to make sure that consumption is done responsibly, that there are things other than just alcohol to have at events. So food, non-alcoholic drinks, always transportation, that all of those are things that they're having conversations about, not only for on-campus events, but especially for those off-campus events. The other thing that we, of course, want to make sure that we're touching on as well is hazing, which like it says on the middle of your screen there, is any action taken or situation created, regardless of where it is, where it's likely to produce any sort of discomfort, embarrassment, harassment, ridicule, harm. And it also, what's important to note is that it's regardless of whether or not the person who is being hazed has asked for it. So even if the individual wants to partake in a particular event, that doesn't mean that it's not hazing. What we wanted to share with you all were some of sort of the warning signs that may be important for you to note. Duke has a zero tolerance policy when it comes to hazing, which you'll probably hear on a lot of campuses. What we also share with you up here are some of the things that we hope that you can do and can help us do in preventing and stopping hazing from happening in our community. We do a number of proactive things to educate both our potential members, but also our current chapter members on how to create a new member experience without hazing. People say that it builds brotherhood or sisterhood, or that it brings people closer together. There are plenty of activities that bring people closer together and build levels of trust and respect that do not involve hazing. I respect my grandmother. She never hazed me. So those are the kinds of conversations that we try to have with students, is have them actually sit down and develop new member education plans, which actually they also submit to us through our Duke Greek Community Standard program, including a calendar, to lay out to us what it is that they're planning on doing during that new member education period. What you all can really do is help look for some of those warning signs that are on the left of your screen there, right? If you're, I know that some of you may not live in the area, and so your conversations with your student may be just over the phone or, video chat or something like that, and may not be quite as much in person. But they're going to talk to you probably pretty honestly about what they're experiencing. And if for any reason you're noticing change in behavior, change is really the biggest sort of thing to keep note of, right? If it's change in physical appearance, if it's change in, the grades that they're receiving in their classes, change in how they're just sort of interacting with you. Maybe you used to talk to them every other day. I know for some of you that seems, wouldn't it be great if they called you once a week? But maybe if you're not hearing from them as often as you usually do, or maybe they're just there's just a change of some kind. If they seem really tired, those are all potential warning signs of hazing, right? One of the biggest things that's important to note when it comes to preventing and stopping hazing from happening at Duke is that there is very little we can do if the report that we get is anonymous. We have, over the past couple of years, received phone calls from parents and families concerned about behaviors that are happening with their students. and they will not tell us their student's name. They will not tell us the organization's name. They will not tell us their name. There is nothing we can do if we don't know who to talk to. And so the biggest thing that I can stress is that regardless of how you report, if you feel like there's something that's happening, the more information that you give us, the more we're actually able to do. I can, have a conversation with our interfraternity council generally if I receive a phone call of that nature, but I can't address the direct issue, and we can't protect the students who may be in harm's way without that information. And so the biggest thing that I can say is that please, 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 if something is happening to your student or to another student that you may interact with or know, the more information that you can give us, the better, because we want to work with you to make sure that this is not happening in our community, but we can't do it without that information. The other thing that we know that people usually have questions about is cost. It is a financial contribution or a financial sort of obligation that students have in joining a fraternity or sorority. Usually those fees are sort of divided in two separate buckets. One of those buckets is international or national fees. Those go directly to the organization's headquarters. And then there's usually local fees, which are kept here with the chapter, particularly at Duke. And you'll see on the screen some of the things that may be included in those fees. So the ones that are going to the National International Office always include insurance coverage. Fun fact, there are very few things in the world that are more expensive to insure than a fraternity. Sororities are a little bit cheaper. The things that are more expensive to insure than a fraternity include a daycare and a nuclear power plant. So many of the national and international fees that are being paid for insurance premiums. Operations, of course, there are staffs, like Kyle talked about, the structures that are in place to support our students here include staffs at their national offices. So some of the fees that they're paying may help pay those salaries. There's sometimes some one-time fees, and so what some of you may feel a little bit of sticker shock when you get that first bill. Usually it goes down the next semester because there are some one-time fees, including like a badge or a new member fee. And then those things, again, you wouldn't have to pay in future semesters. Also, a lot of times this includes like leadership opportunities, so maybe attending conferences or regional meetings, some travel there that are opportunities for your student. And then with the local fees, those are all sort of operational expenses, right? It could be tied to philanthropy and being able to support fundraising efforts. Some of that money goes to social, so whether that be maybe that they're having a formal at the end of the semester, and so some of the dues help pay for the venue for that or the transportation. Educational programming, community service. So again, just operational things that we want to support the chapter in doing, and they can't really do without a little bit of money in their bank account. Of course, brotherhood and sisterhood events, and then again, another little pot of money to help with travel to particular conferences or programs that may be available for the student experience. Generally, the amount in a given semester ranges both within council and between council. I would say that on average, most of our chapters range somewhere between $500 and $1,000 in a given semester, with a few outliers on either end. We do have a couple groups that may be paying more like $1,500. We also have a couple groups that are paying, $300, and sort of everywhere in between. One of the things to note about dues is that some of those ones that may be a little bit more expensive, that may be all inclusive. So you may pay $1,000 and not have to open up your bank account any other time the rest of the semester, because that even includes like down to the t-shirts, right? Some of those ones that may be only a couple $100s, they may nickel and dime you throughout the semester for all of those additional expenses. Not always, but just something to note that when your student is asking questions and learning a little bit more about how much it may cost for a particular organization, that they're asking those questions too. Like, it costs $500 this semester. What does that $500 get me? When else am I going to have to, ask for, or when else are they going to ask me for money? So that they then have a better idea as what actually is included in those fees for that particular organization.
There's a couple other topics we think it's really important for you to understand how to ask your students questions and talk to them about as they're going through the recruitment process. The first of those is really values. We talk about this being a values-driven experience for students, and hopefully your student went through the Embark program in the fall semester. If they didn't, we will offer another one in February for folks who missed that. But in that program, we ask them to help clarify their values and think about where those came from and how it impacted their life on a regular basis. So hopefully they've reflected on that a bit, or you could prompt some of those questions with them as well. So some things that you might want to ask them about are if they see those values reflected in the organization, and how they might hope an organization would help them grow or evolve in their values. As far as new member education goes, there's some really great questions they can ask to get a better understanding of what that might look like. Specifically, can that chapter give them a good outline of what new member education looks like? Going back to our conversations about hazing, if they can't provide you with much information about that, that may be a clue that they're being a little bit shady. Not necessarily, it's not a guarantee, but that's a good thing for your student to be asking and for you to be encouraging them to ask and asking what they learned. Again, avoid asking those closed questions. You really want to make sure that you're using some open-ended questions about chapters. What did they learn? How did that go? As opposed to yes and no questions. And then as they look forward to their development as a leader and some of the potential benefits from that organization, helping them think about other ways that they might actually be able to get involved. Are they just going to be a member and that's all that's expected? Or are there ways that they can volunteer further? Are there positions they can get involved in, or do they have to wait a while? And help them think through some of those opportunities, but also make sure they understand what other commitments they already have, whether that's specific class loads, other organizations, any sports or activities they're involved in, any job they might have, so that they have a good thought about their time and making sure that they can actually fit everything into a day and a week and not get overburdened. So looking forward, we want to give you just a little bit of information about each of those councils that Kyle highlighted earlier. The first of those you see on the screen is the Interfraternity Council. Their email is there and the link for registration, which is still open if you have a student that wants to participate. That will start on Tuesday, January 8th, and those rounds will go through for a couple weeks. They'll have opportunities to meet every chapter as well as go to events at the different chapter houses or other sites as they sort of narrow down their options about who they're interested in and which chapters are interested in the members. Pan-Hellenic Association, the formal recruitment process for that will start Friday, January 11th. That sign up has already closed as they've already had to register for that, but there's much more information at the link there, the guide to recruitment that you can see. That has all the specifics. I think we have a lot of specific questions often about the Pan-Hellenic recruitment process, and they've really gone through and provided a lot of information. So if your student is in that process and is feeling nervous and doesn't have a sense of what they need to do or where they need to be or how to dress, they have some good examples and a lot of thorough information on there because that process is a little more specific, and the timelines for that also go over the next couple weeks in January, and they'll narrow down their interests as well as the chapters that are interested in them. The contact information for both the Multicultural Greek Council and the National Pan-Hellenic Council are listed there. As you can see, they do not have council-wide organized intake processes, but those organizations will choose to host their own intake processes over the spring semester. So if they want to get more information about something, if your student is looking to know more about those, we'd love it if they emailed any of those addresses specifically, and we can find out a little bit more and get them connected to some folks that have some deeper information. And finally, we have a lot of our contact information up here for you, specifically the councils that we work with, what you might want to know about. Our website, don't forget that chapter scorecard is up there if you want to pull that down. You didn't get a chance to earlier. But we really appreciate you taking time to learn about some of this and know more about what your students might be going through and how you can best support them. And I think we're going to turn to some questions now.
Great, yes, thank you. If you're listening and have questions and haven't asked them yet, this is your opportunity. Go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I will help facilitate those questions. We do have one right now that I'd love for us to talk about, and I think particularly worrying about off-campus functions being a place where underage drinking is more likely to happen Some parents are wondering, what's the purpose of off-campus? Why off-campus, and how does that help facilitate community in a fraternity or sorority?
Yeah, great question. Being fairly honest about why our students are doing events off campus is because there are generally fewer regulations in spaces off campus than there are on campus, which is not I'm glad we have the regulations we do on campus, but they're not subject to like the Duke Community Standard quite as tightly as they are, or the Housing and Residence Life policies, because those spaces are not owned by Housing and Residence Life. The expectation, though, at off-campus houses is that they are now residents of the city of Durham. And so many times what they actually then are subject to is not just their national and international policies, but also like local Durham policies, like noise and those kinds of things. Students, I think, are moving to things more off campus also because then they can have more people at them. And so just because it's usually a larger space than some of the common spaces that they have access to on campus, also is less cost prohibitive because the spaces on campus that are large enough to host, the types of events that they're having are pretty expensive on campus. And if they're using an off-campus house or even an off-campus venue, costs may be a little bit cheaper than it is for some of the largest spaces on campus. And also they're competing against sort of fewer people for those spaces than we are for some of the hot, large spaces here on campus. I would say that purpose-wise, I think that students spend a lot of time on campus, and sometimes getting a little bit away from the hustle and bustle and stress of Duke can be just like physically removing yourself from campus for a time. I think, in speaking even to some of our seniors who live off campus, like they like the fact that when they're on campus, they're thinking about Duke, and they're able to be here even when they're not in class, but just studying or those kinds of things. And then when they can go back to their home or their that's off campus, they can relax a little and whether that be playing guitar or it be cooking or reading for fun, but it almost provides a little bit of space difference between what each both being on campus and off campus provides. So I think that some of our students like the idea of being a little bit off campus as an opportunity to separate themselves a little and give themselves maybe even a little bit of a mental break from the rigor that they may feel on campus, regardless of what it is that they're doing, whether it involves alcohol or not.
Great. We have a few more questions about safety right now, and I'm going to kind of ask them together so that you can figure out how to answer them. But one is this complexity of, we talk about hazing not being able to happen, but still talking about warning signs of hazing. And I think on a similar note, there are questions again about safety track records and how parents and students can look at maybe a history of what organizations have maybe had what infringements and policies.
Yeah, great questions. So we still talk about hazing because it still happens. And I think that we would be doing a disservice to say that this community is 100% hazing free. We talk about it because we want to make sure that any situation that is happening on this campus that is questionable in nature or putting any student even close to harm's way is one that we're having conversations about and trying to prevent moving forward. And so we share the warning signs with you because we don't know your student the way that you know your student, of course, and we will never know your student the way that you know your student. And so we hope to be partners with you in being able to address some of these issues and prevent them from happening moving forward, so that eventually we don't have to talk about hazing because we know that it's never happening here. But like I said, we need to be partners in that because we can't address it if we don't know where it's happening and with whom it's happening. When it comes to the question of sort of historical data, That's not something that we currently have access to. The scorecard is something that actually our current staff just built, and is something that when we got to Duke this past year, was something that we wanted to make sure we were sharing with families and with potential members. So we do not have like historical data on that, but it's beginning, right? So like the report from this spring is on the website. When we add this fall report to the website at the beginning of January, there will then be 2 of them, right? So we will eventually have sort of the ability to see trends, but currently that's not something that we're able to post publicly.
Great, thank you. Let's go back a little bit to that fit. So when a student and a parent are first sitting down to talk about how do I figure out my options, how can a student figure out which one is right for me? How do I pick in all of these options?
We talked a bit about the values piece and their time and the opportunities with the chapter. But one of the most important things you can talk to your student about is just what they're looking for in an experience at Duke in general. Right? They may have an academic experience that they've outlined pretty well at this point, or they are on their way to figuring out and confirming, but what are they looking for in their experience outside of the classroom? And helping them really think through that. What did they enjoy in high school? What do you know that they tend to enjoy and gravitate towards? And then helping them think about, okay, what are the questions I can ask of a group to determine if they have that? Saying, okay, so what do you do for your brotherhood or sisterhood events? And is that something that sounds like how I like to make friends and get to know folks and build relationships with people? What kind of service do you do? All of these groups are connected to service and philanthropy in some way. And so maybe some of that is really close to their heart and they want to do service related to that. That's a great way to learn more about a group. And all of our groups are listed on our website, but they can also go look up the national web pages for any of those groups to find out other information about them. It doesn't just have to be the Duke chapter of that group. All of them have other national pages that list a lot of that information that they could use.
So is freshman year the only opportunity for students to join sororities and fraternities?
Great question. It is not. Duke operates under what's known as deferred recruitment, deferred intake. And so as many of you probably know, first semester freshmen are not eligible to join, but students at any other point of their Duke career are allowed to go through recruitment and intake processes. What I will say is that for our Panhellenic and for our IFC groups, it is most often during their freshman year that a student will join the spring of their first year. We do have some sophomores and even some juniors who go through those processes. For our National Panhellenic Council groups and our Multicultural Greek Council groups, those range. So we have some chapters that may take second semester first year students. Some of those organizations actually require that you have sophomore standing before you're able to join. So it sort of ranges a little bit based on the group or based on the council as to sort of when traditional time is, but post first semester is anytime after first semester is fair game.
Great. We have a few more specific to different organizations, and I wonder whether to answer this, we could go back to the page that has information on the separate recruitment processes. So that will help answer some of the questions, but they include how will people know where to go on January 8th, like exactly where and when, and how would a student get that information?
Great question. So for Interfraternity Council recruitment, which starts on January 8th, if they've registered, they'll start to receive emails about all of those details, and they need to register before the 8th. But that event will start at 7 p.m. that day at the Nasher Museum, so right here on campus. That gives them plenty of time to travel back to campus before classes start the next day, and then to be able to stop by the Nasher. That event will run from 7 to 9 p.m. that evening, and students do not have to stay the whole time. So even if your student's flight lands at like 6:30, right, but they want to make sure that they get over for a little bit of that, they can come sometime later in the evening, and that's totally fine. For all all of our processes, the best way is for students to either reach out directly to us to find out more information or to register for the processes, because then they will be getting plenty of emails about those things.
And if you have a daughter interested in joining Panhellenic, registration has closed, and she has already been in contact with what we call a Gamma Chi, who is either a junior or senior member in one of our 10 sororities that has decided to forego her space in recruiting for her chapter to help facilitate women going through the recruitment process. She already has 2 of them to be served as resources to develop them throughout the process. And so within that, they're able to have that connection piece. They're able to communicate with them directly with any sort of questions or concerns, or like understanding logistics or where to show up when. So that communication is already happening with the women specifically. But once again, to look back at that bit.ly/guide to recruitment link, everything is in there.
Great, so continuing with those questions, how long are these processes? We know the start date, for example, of interfraternity and Panhellenic. How long will this happen, and is that separate from the length of time that a student will be a pledge?
Yeah, so the Interfraternity Council and Panhellenic Association processes will both be over on January 20th. That is bid day for both councils. For our Multicultural Greek Council and our National Panhellenic Council, those processes, like Anna had mentioned before, are chapter specific and look a little bit different. So those typically may include an interview, it may include attending an interest meeting, some other meetings and opportunities to meet members. And it sort of goes also into the new member experience for our MGC and NPHC communities. When it comes to sort of the time that someone is a new member, it is a Duke policy that all processes and procedures related to new member education are completed before spring break. So the Friday before spring break is the cutoff for when all of that is supposed to happen, including initiations or any sort of ceremonies to end their time as a new member. If you are also hearing from your student that, after spring break they're coming back and still haven't been initiated, or they're still a new member, like that's also against the rules. If those are things that you're hearing, we would also love to hear about that from you as well. But so by the time spring break comes around, all of this is done, both the recruitment processes and also the new member experience.
Great. So once students are part of a new organization, what happens next? What will change, or what obligations will students have, and are there any housing obligations?
Yeah, great question. So things probably will change. I hope that they change a little bit, because these organizations were sort of created to bring out the best in individuals. And so it's not to change who they are, but to bring out and sort of enhance the qualities and characteristics that they already know to be true about them. My mom regularly tells me that she knew all of the things that I now know about myself because of my organization. It just took me joining for me to believe them. What will change, right, is that at a minimum, they'll be attending a weekly chapter meeting, right? Usually most of our organizations are also maybe having some other sort of event or program in a given week, perhaps a couple, but those are all things that are sort of that we hope students are taking advantage of, but they're only taking advantage of them when they're also balancing their academic loads or maybe other involvement opportunities that they have on campus. Our chapters are already made up of Duke students, right? And Duke students, first and foremost, are here to be focused on their academics. And so they understand that sometimes the time commitment a student may be able to say like, hey, I have a midterm on Friday, and so I'm not gonna be able to come to our event this week because I need to study for my midterm. And our chapters are gonna support them in doing that. But part of what will change, that there will be some obligation to attend some additional events. Now, what I will say is that they're paying a lot of money, so they probably should go to some of these events because that's what their money is going towards. And so really, you're going to get out of it what you put into it. And so if you're becoming an officer, that's going to add a little bit more time to your plate. If you're going to join a committee or help plan a philanthropy event, Those, of course, are going to add a little bit more time. When it comes to housing, there is an opportunity for many of our groups, about half of them, to live starting sophomore year in what's referred to as the section of that particular organization. So for most students, that ends up being their sophomore year if the chapter has a housing section that they'd be living in. And those processes come about pretty soon after they've joined, that it'll be time for them to decide whether or not they're interested in living in the section that their organization has. And there are obligations that the organization has to fill the beds in their particular section through our Housing and Residence Life office. And so there may be some obligations that the particular chapter sets up as to who those individuals are. For some, that may be the executive board and then some other members. For others, there may be some other sort of like system by which they decide who's living in section. But because there's an expectation of Duke students to live on campus, it's a really neat opportunity to jump in at the beginning of your sophomore year, moving onto West Campus and living among your new brothers or sisters. But there are also students who are members of our organizations who don't live in section. They're not big enough for everyone to live in. And so know also that if your student, for whatever reason, is not living in section, that does not mean that they can't be a member of their particular organization.
Great. There are also some questions about if any of the housing processes are going to change, given that the housing is kind of changing on Duke's campus, and where fraternities and sororities might be moving in the next year or two.
Yeah, great question. So currently the housing processes are remaining the same. The university does have a task force through the Office of the President that's looking at housing for the future. And so we may be in for some changes when that task force sort of provides a report in 2019. But for this particular group of students who will be joining our groups, the processes will remain the same as they've been. Our fraternities and sororities that are currently housed on Central Campus, which is the part of campus that will close at the end of this academic year, they have actually already been through a process this fall where they decided sort of where they'll move for the following academic year. And those are mostly spaces on West Campus, so where the rest of sort of the upper class students live. And then some of them will also be in 300 Swift, which is an apartment building that Duke has taken over just off of campus. That's apartment style living and also very nice. It has a pool. So those are either in 300 Swift or on West Campus is where all of our groups will be moving to. So that's where like students who may be sophomores next fall or even juniors who are planning on living in section would be living. One thing to just note also is that our staff does not, we serve as advocates between sort of housing and residence life in our chapters, but we do not own the housing and residence life processes for our organizations. So if there are a lot of like housing specific questions that people may have, those are going to be best directed to housing and residence life. So just because they're the ones that have the absolute most updated information and really manage all of the processes when it comes to assignments and spaces, we don't really do too much in that space.
That's actually a great segue, because we did have some questions about what role your office and the Division of Student Affairs plays to fraternities and sororities when it comes to supporting them or community building or keeping students accountable to policies of the institution. Yeah,
good question. I like to see us as being more or trying as much as we can to be more on the proactive side than the reactive side of the equation. So a lot of our time is spent in individual or small group meetings with students or with advisors, with campus partners, looking at what we see as being trends across the country, or even things that we're starting to hear here at Duke, of areas that we know that like students, either skills that they may need to be building, or areas that we know have been challenges for populations of Duke students or students, again, across the country, are tackling. And how can we use fraternity and sorority to help provide an opportunity for students to address those things? So Kyle spoke a little bit earlier about some of the programming that we've been doing One of the things that our office has been working on building out is a series of programming that's class-based. So Embark is the first year program, or the potential member program, even if students are not first years. Our Compass, which is our sophomore year experience, is focused on the connection between fraternity and sorority and potential like leadership opportunities, or also career. And so how do we use fraternity and sorority to help a student figure out what they want to do for their next 3 years at Duke, but then also what can you be doing in your organization that's going to give you a leg up in getting an internship or a job. Our junior program, which actually will launch this spring, is called Beacon. So we're sticking with this navigation theme. And Beacon is specifically for students who are coming back from studying abroad. And so it's going to be focused on making meaning of this new worldview that they may have from their abroad experience, and how to bring that back into their organization, and how to sort of deal with some of the reverse culture shock that they may be feeling as they're entering their organization. And then we actually next year we'll be launching a senior year program that's focused on like, how do I leave a legacy, and what does that mean, and how do I also go into the world beyond Duke and not only leverage my Duke network, but leverage my fraternity or sorority network. So we spend a lot of time working with students and partners on developing and scaffolding programming that's going to help support their experience here and beyond. We also, when it comes to accountability, spend a lot of our time in conversations with students who've messed up. We do not own the student conduct process. That happens through our Office of Student Conduct. But regularly we'll have students come in who are like, this didn't go as planned, right? Maybe it was something involving an off-campus event. Maybe it was just an interaction that they had with a fellow member. But we're there to help process those things through with them as an advisor, as a mentor, and just as a resource here on campus, both personally and through their organization. So we spend a lot of time also just helping them problem solve, which I think is a skill that we hope that they're developing here, because we know that that's something that is going to help them long term.
Great. Can you talk about how large the pledge classes are, and are there any statistics about how many students get bids? Is that a common thing?
Yeah, so new member class size ranges both within council and outside of council. So, we have chapters that bring in 1 to 2 members in a given semester, and we have chapters that are bringing in 30 members in a given semester. It really depends sort of on the organization, and also sort of on how many people may be participating in that particular process. So new member class size ranges. It's generally within a particular council or organization will be similar to what they've brought in past years. And so they know like these are some of the things that we have to make sure we're doing to make sure that everyone feels a part and included and retained. And so that's, I think, sort of to the numbers piece. What was the second part?
How much of a time, how many people get bids?
Oh, how many people get bids? Yes. So that varies based on council and how that process may work. We do not really have the statistics on that for our Multicultural Greek Council or National Panhellenic Council, since those are organizations that manage their own processes and operate on a level of discretion where we don't really know who is expressing interest until they're expressing interest in joining. For our Interfraternity Council, last year we had about 350 men begin the process, and about 290 of them ended up with bids. Many of the men, that's 60-ish men who did not, many of them actually were self-selected to not join or to join a selective living group. And I'll let Kyle touch on the Panhellenic numbers.
Yeah, Panhellenic is about the same rate as well, where we have roughly about 400 women start, and then we did have about 270 get placed in some capacity within one of the 10 organizations, though a good majority, probably about 80 of the women who did not join an organization also self-selected to not continue the process, either because they didn't find a fit or they did not ultimately decide that this was the right move for them. So within that, there's different levels of how joining works with Panhellenic. And so it's basically you're able to rank up to 2 chapters. And so it's been fortunate enough to be able to announce that at least 90% of the women deciding to join a chapter in the last day obtain the #1 preference that they wanted.
Great. So during the recruitment process, how much time should students expect to be committing to the recruitment process? How will parents know if it seems like too much time?
So that'll also be dependent on the council. What I would say generally is that the nice thing about the Panhellenic process is that happens just on weekends. So, but the student should expect to spend pretty much all of the daylight hours between Saturday and Sunday of the weekend of January 10th or January 11th, and then the following weekend, that Saturday and Sunday, participating in the recruitment process. The nice thing is that there are breaks throughout that time when they may not have a party. That I use the word party, it's a round really, it's on campus, where they may not have a particular round during that time. And so a lot of students are studying or working on things during those times. For the Interfraternity Council, there are events that take place pretty much every day from January 9th through the 20th. But it's mostly just in the evenings, and it's also not all chapters on all days. And so students are sort of able to select, and then also organizations are narrowing down. So really, when it gets to be sort of the second week of that process, individuals may be going to an event every night or every other night, but they're not out, they should not be out the whole night. It may just be to visit one particular group for a bit, or to visit two groups, but it should not ever, neither of those processes should be interfering at all with students' ability to be going to class, or if they're on like a sports team or part of the band or on the dance team, like all of those things they should still be doing just as they usually would. For our Multicultural Greek Council, International Panhellenic Council, a lot of those things happen over like sort of back-to-back weekends for chapters, because usually it involves not just the local chapter here at Duke, but also perhaps the chapter at North Carolina Central or at UNC or NC State or even Elon. And so they do those things usually on the weekends, and it may be a full weekend or two back-to-back weekends again. But again, like none of it should ever interfere with a student's ability to go to class, study, those kinds of things.
We are nearing the end of our questions, so if any parents or family members have burning questions that are left, this would be your time to submit them. But I'll ask a more logistical question, which is, how will fees be charged to families? I think one question specifically is, will it show up on a bill from the bursar?
Great question. So it will not show up on a bill from the bursar. This will be a separate bill through the organization. So many of our organizations, part of their national, international sort of structure and fees also go towards paying for some sort of financial management system. And so your student, or if you are helping your student pay for their fees, would see that show up on perhaps a program called like Bill Highway or Greek Bill, but it's a financial management system that the organization uses to pay their fees. It may be through some sort of invoice from the organization, but it would not be through a bill from the bursar's office. It will be probably some sort of bill that your student will receive privately from their organization, not through the university at all.
All right. So I think with that, we're going to call it a wraps. I really want to thank Emily and Kyle and Anna for spending your afternoon with us and virtually spending your afternoon with our parents and families. For those who are listening, we are recording this right now and we will post it within 48 hours, hopefully sooner, but we're going to transcribe it and put it online along with the video. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you in our next webinar.